I've gone live now. You're back.
Oh my God.
We're live now, Sami.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you and I can see you.
You can hear me?
Can you hear me as well?
Okay.
Yeah, una freeze kidogo. I don't know what has happened today with the Kenyan Wi-Fi. Why is it letting us down?
Let me tell you, I think there's someone who's trying to sabotage me, but they shall not succeed. They want to trauma.
No, they really want to destroy. They were so psyched up for this thing. Let me update. Actually, post that we're back live now. Nimeweka on Instagram. I'll also go on LinkedIn and update ile link. Kwa sasa unajua ubaya kwenda ukirudi live.
Just comment on like some of those as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me put it here. Need to find the sent what I've sent you just now. And I can put it back. Hey, what a way to be introduced to going live.
As in, like, I don't know. I'm even like, I think I have PTSD.
I know.
I would never be the one to offer to do it.
No, now that we know, but I guess, can it get any worse than this?
Okay, really, it can't.
It can't get any worse than this. Let me now post also on my profile. Change the link back. It can't get any worse than this. But finally, we've gotten there. You know now LinkedIn, how do you even find the post that you put? Here it is. Okay, let me edit and put the right link. Hey, anyway. At least now we can hear each other, so we can proceed.
But I want to like put on my YouTube.
And there won't be any interference. Because I know there's usually a bit of a latency to YouTube, but as long as we can hear each other, it will reach YouTube at the right time.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think I've put the right link also.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll just... You've shared the link on your side?
Yeah, I did. So I'm seeing we have like 3 guys.
Okay, so we can get started. All right. Okay, so for the people who've joined, thank you so much for bearing with us. The worst things that could happen have happened, but at least we've at least we have gotten through and we're here. It's always good to persevere through, but I won't waste any more of your time. Let us get started with the nitty-gritty of this live. So my name's Belinda, and today our guest is Samantha Luseno. Samantha, maybe if you can just start by introducing yourself, sharing, what you do, where you're based, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, so my name is Samantha Luseno. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I am a data and policy analyst, and I currently work for a global advisory firm that basically deals in advising governments and non-governmental organizations on the social impact of their different projects and programs. Yes. So that is...
Mm-hmm. That's great. And some of you may be wondering how Samantha and I know each other. So we're both alumni of the University of Manchester. Maybe if you can just let them know what you studied and basically, what brought you to the UK and why you moved back.
Yeah, so I met Sonny back in the day, like before all these things started. Like we're in Brookhouse together, so we both did IFY, International Foundation Year, which I know Sonny has spoken about on her channel before, so I wouldn't like go into the details of explaining what that is. So we both then got accepted to the University of Manchester. So I did a bachelor's degree in Actuarial Science at the University of Manchester, and followed up with a master's degree in economics. And it's not our tradition. Guys in Kenya usually say guys of alliance. I must also mention I was in Alliance Girls High School back in the day.
Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh.
But yeah, so from an education standpoint, I think that's me in a nutshell. So I mean, like, I've gone through a lot of other courses throughout the years, obviously from a professional perspective, but yeah, that's me, like, in a broad sense with regard to my education.
Because I even remember there was a point you're even doing the actuarial papers, like to become a certified actuary, right?
Yeah, yeah, I did that for some time, and I basically at some point in my life shifted career paths and
Mm-hmm.
then just opted to stop doing them. So I did that up to CT5,
Mm-hmm.
and I just opted to stop doing them because it didn't make any sense in the, like, basically based on the career path that I saw myself taking, just didn't make sense to, like, pursue all of them.
Okay. Yeah, because of course you mentioned that you've done actuarial and then actuarial science, and then you've gone ahead and you've also done a master's in economics, and currently you're working in as a policy analyst, in that NGO space. So maybe what probably led you into that career path, moving from a very mathematical kind of degree on to policy analysis, yeah, and assessment. Yeah.
So, like, just first of all, to clarify, I think they are both mathematical in a sense because they're both very intense math related careers. But I think my initial motivation for pursuing actuarial science was wrong, and I didn't know that until I pursued internships in earlier years of, like, uni. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, I wanted to pursue actuarial science because I thought I would use that degree to make a change in insurance policy. So I had always been extremely passionate about insurance policy. So in earlier years of my career, I tried out private sector. I worked for what was then Alexander Forbes in Kenya, now Zamara. For I just basically did an internship with them. I also did an internship with Britam, but off of that
Mm-hmm.
experience, it was a very fast realization that I'm not about
That's
valuing
not your
insurance.
area. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, Britam was actually the last internship before I did my master's. So I basically went into my final year knowing that there needed to be a shift, and I needed to position myself to make that shift. So hence the pursuing of the economics degree.
Okay, perfect. And at least you've mentioned there like some of the different opportunities that you got started with when you went back to Kenya. But maybe before we even start on that career journey, which leads on to the main topic of today, which is, the whole process of moving back to Kenya, how to get started and things that you've learned along the way. Maybe if you can just let our viewers know, like, what made you first of all even come to the UK and what made you go back and not want to pursue maybe at least a grad scheme at first before moving back?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing, okay, why I came to the UK, I think that's, like, fairly direct. I felt like I would get more out of, especially my actuarial science degree, if I pursued it in the UK versus if I pursued it in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely would advise someone who's trying to pursue a career in actuarial science to pursue it there. First of all, we were taught by practitioners, so a lot of the learning was very practical. I mean, there were exemptions that came with the degree as well, so that also, like, puts you ahead with regard to, like, your career development. So I mean, there were quite a number of benefits when I looked at it, at least from a lens of my first degree.
Yeah.
um yeah, and why I came back to Kenya is, again, I've always, first of all, I was very passionate about social impact and basically being in the social impact space. As I mentioned, my initial motivation was to adapt insurance policy or work in a space that I would be able to influence insurance policy in Kenya specifically. So the goal was always to come back. But again, around that time, I think Sonny knows this because she's a personal friend. My dad was a bit unwell, so for me, it was like a sort of a decision, sort of based on
Mm.
family and family alignments and priorities, versus anything else. Because ideally what I should have done is probably pursue at least a graduate scheme program for a year or two before transitioning fully.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And for those of you who, of course, don't know us, we've all been lived and brought up in Kenya. So it's not like we were brought up abroad and we just moved back and have no idea. So we actually schooled and grew up in Kenya, and then we just came to the UK to pursue our, further studies. And Samantha went back to Kenya in 2018, and I've still remained here. So I still currently work here. But just moving on to the topic of the day. So you finally decided to move back in 2018, and how did that go?
First of all, culture shock. I think first of all, there's just genuinely a culture shock because everything has changed. Starting from the fact that you lived alone. So now a lot of the time, I know guys come back and they live with their folks. So that's a whole shift. And then just the dynamics. Kenya is not the UK, because like in the UK, I know quite a number of people who applied for jobs, and I mean there were like more or less immediate callbacks, especially if you had the grades to back them. I think like the job market is a bit trickier to navigate in the Kenyan context, so jobs are not very readily available. Those that were, and I was in one graduate trainee program at the National Hospital Insurance Fund. Those that were, financially were just not very fulfilling. So like there's that whole transition, and then there's the realization very soon after that you probably have to make money some other way. So yeah, that was what generally, like without even saying too much, because I know like at some point in this call we'll go into like further
More
details.
detail.
I
Yeah.
think the transition can be rocky.
Mm-hmm.
And even from conversations I've had with guys ever since like we started promoting this conversation, a lot of guys come to Kenya and they expect that they have very hot degrees from lead universities and basically no one cares about those degrees when you land.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
was it like, how long did it take you to get your first job?
Now, to be honest, I was very lucky because I graduated in September, and I had a number of like internships, and by January I was like sort of more or less settled at NHIF. So I basically like had a 3-month transition. So I consider myself among the luckiest ones because basically the graduate trainee program really came with like a lot of exposure for me. So I think my transition was fairly fast, but again, Kenya is Kenya. Like that's the unfortunate thing about Kenya. Let me just say it like that.
So you
Anyone
were yeah. So was it normal? Is it normal to get a graduate scheme back home, or what's the typical starting point that a graduate coming from UK should expect to start in the job market?
So graduate trainee programs are very common. It's just that a lot of the time they are not timed. So you have a lot of guys getting into like employment as interns or graduate trainees or whatever, and they stay as interns for even 3 years. And as I mentioned before, like the pay is definitely not that fulfilling. And people just have like, I think Kenyan employers to an extent just have a habit of like keeping people in this cycle of should I say underemployment. So even they do know your capabilities, at times you might end up in this cycle where you're just on a graduate trainee program for an endless amount of time. So that's very common.
Oh, so they're not fixed. It's not like a 12-month scheme and you know at the end of it you're going to become a certain position.
So like they tend to renew them. So you could potentially get like a 6-month program. Months they renew it for another 6 months. After 6 months, they change the terms of your contract but renew it for another 6 months. So that's a very common phenomenon in Kenya.
Okay. And is there any difference as such between internships and graduate schemes in terms of pay and also how your like your tasks,
No.
are they any different? So it's like an internship.
So in terms of pay, no. In terms of tasks, obviously, because you're coming in with a slightly higher level of expertise, you might actually get slightly advanced assignments. But let me tell you, when you're navigating the Kenyan market, humility is key. Humility is definitely key, because you know the saddest thing is opportunities open up once you have experience.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, especially like in my case, for instance, while I had a master's degree, I didn't have that much like on the job training.
Yeah.
So you notice like at very lower levels of like your career, really like you can't avoid like taking one of those jobs that probably pays you very little, and also probably like, should I say, to a very small extent misuses you, because you'll do the binding, you'll do the photocopying, you'll do all those tasks that maybe in your head, because you have a master's degree, you don't expect to do. So I mean, like, it calls for a very high level of humility, to be honest, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. And there's a question here from John. He's asking, do
but
you
I mean, like, I think for me at least it's been worth it. But I cannot deny that I did, and I think that's what this conversation is about.
No, it's okay. I think there's a bit of a technical mishap there. It's okay. Go ahead, Samantha. Can you hear me now? I think the latency has started again. But I can hear you properly.
Can you hear me now, Sonny?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Just okay.
Can you hear me now? I was just asking you to carry on. I think when I asked the question, you couldn't hear it at the time, so it's fine. Just carry on with what you were saying.
Yeah, basically, I was saying, it definitely comes with a bit of a shock. It's a bit of a culture shock.
Okay, that's fine. So I was just letting you know that I can see a question there from John. He's just asking, in this process, you mentioned you have to have humility. Do you feel that you had any advantage, having studied abroad? Like, did it set you apart during those interviews, even if it's for an internship position or graduate trainee?
I think I now started realizing a lot of those things a lot later in my career, when I was like, now when I had a serious job, and I'd advertise for graduate trainees or interns, and I'd look at the quality of CVs that I'd receive, I'd look at the quality of cover letters that I'd receive. And at that point, then it started sort of becoming a bit clearer to me that there was a bit of a gap in terms of how people package themselves in instances. But at lower levels, to be honest, I think I started seeing the quality and the benefit of my degree, my 2 degrees, probably 2 years into my job search, or 2 years into my.
Okay, so it's like you're at a level playing field when you're starting off, but then it makes more of a difference as you start growing up through the channels.
Yeah, I think that's what I've realized. And I think also, like, in terms of certain like practical application, then that your international degree may make a difference at that point.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, John, for that question. Anyone else, if you also have your questions, definitely send them through. We're going to cover them as we go along. So just moving on to our next question, Samantha. What hurdles? I know we've kind of covered them already, but which ones stand out to you from the couple of years that you've been back in Kenya and navigating through the workplace? What hurdles would you like to highlight that you'd want other people to anticipate and to be prepared for?
I think like the first hurdle, to be honest, and really, like, to be honest, it took me 2 years to actually establish myself career-wise. So I think that's the first thing. I think a lot of us come back to Kenya expecting that there's a job sort of somewhere on a silver platter, or you come back to Kenya expecting that you know Sonny who knows Nani, who will link you to Nani who has a so, who has a
You
job
know
for you.
people who know people. Yeah.
Know people who know people. And like I think that mentality can be very disappointing, because you'll find yourself in a situation where nothing is forthcoming, and you might even get disappointed in your connects or in your famo, or in like basically guys who you expected would be linking areas. So I think that was the first hurdle. The job was not automatic, and I realized very quickly that I had to prove myself beyond my degree, which is something that you start learning even at later stages, or at later points in your career. I think another shocker, to be honest, is the monetary the monetary gain. I mean, like Sonny, me and you have always talked like over the years. So I mean, like even what you were earning during a graduate scheme, I think it would still take you maybe about 2 years to earn in a Kenyan context. But again, that's not necessarily a negative thing, because a lot of employers value the amount they give to their employees based on the socioeconomic situations in that particular country. So you really would not expect to earn the same in the UK and earn the same in Kenya and then earn the same in the US. So that for me was a bit of a hurdle. But again, something that I sort of like now came to understand a lot later. I think another hurdle, to be honest, was societal pressure, because then you come back to Kenya, and then basically guys are expecting that Samantha has a master's from the University of Manchester. You cannot then start explaining that you're earning petty cash somewhere, and like your papers, and like it becomes like very difficult to have that conversation with guys. And in fact, I had a conversation with my dad before I got the job, right before this one. Like, yeah, right before this, the one I'm in right now. And he basically asked me, Samantha, when is my money going to make sense? Like, because I had
Yeah.
been in the UK for 4 years, and like it just seemed like things were just not making sense. So I genuinely think those like probably are the major hurdles. Another thing I can probably speak to is, and like just this is just speaking about the UK experience especially, I think guys in the UK are very conscious of certain things. So they're very conscious about sexual harassment, they're very conscious about professionalism, they're very conscious about certain
Work-life
things.
balance.
um Locally they may not be as conscious. Yes, work balance, yes, work-life balance is another one. uh Mental health, things like that. Things like that are often not discussed in a Kenyan context, and there those things that you go into a career with, and like they're basically just silent elements. So I think those are some hurdles that I faced. Of course, like if someone brought something up, I'd be able to like elaborate on it as well. But I
Yeah.
think were like some of the key ones.
And then now from your journey, because of course your journey wasn't all negative, right? Like you've learned so much, and there are certain things which you think may have been instrumental in making you who you are today. What are some of those things that you feel had to happen to, get you where you are today in terms of your career when you're in Kenya?
I guess like to be honest, I really cannot say that there's any part of my journey that I do not appreciate, because I genuinely do think that I am genuinely who I am. I've gotten the opportunities that I have now because of those experiences. And like just the first thing that I would say is like I work in a very powerful space. So I think that has been something that I'm very grateful for. When I was at NHIF, I was part of the team that developed the strategy for the universal health coverage program that was rolled out in Kenya, which was a very powerful project. When I was at Kipra, I built the capacity of counties on various policy things, and just basically the policy making process, which I feel like was a very pertinent need at the time, considering the fact that, first of all, counties had just been rolled out at the time, and they didn't have a lot of understanding of a lot of the roles that they had to play, or that they were constitutionally or legally mandated to play. So I think that was like extremely a key issue at the time. KCSPOG was, which is Kenya Civil Society Platform on Oil and Gas, where I've just left, was also like, I mean, like it was amazing working there because from that perspective, I was able to understand some of the issues that communities and citizens are facing. And so that now that I'm going into a different space, then I'm able to actually advocate for real issues to be addressed. And I mean, like IDinsight is doing a lot of work now, not just in Kenya, but at a regional level, at a global level. So I think I'm very fortunate to be in a space that everything you do basically counts. So I'm grateful for that. I think I have had amazing mentors. And I think a lot of the time we talk about doom and gloom and things like that, and how the entire journey is. But I can honestly tell guys that I think there are people who are there and willing to help. When I was at NHIF, my director was Nicodemus Odongo, and he was amazing. Just the way he thought, his implementation of things, his ability to mentor young people was just something, I mean, amazing. Kipra was an organization that like basically focused on bringing up young people and advancing them in the policy space. So at Kipra, everyone from Dr. Rose Ngugi to Nancy and Elder, those were like very, like people who like focused on bringing you up to the next level. And now my immediate former boss, Charles, was amazing and even became, should I say, a personal friend and mentor to me. So a lot of my employers have been extremely supportive of me, and they gave me opportunities at a very young age. And I'm sure guys have seen me publishing in newspapers and things like that and whatever. And I think I started publishing in newspapers when I was about 25. And that was on account of one of my bosses being supportive to me. So I think I've had very supportive bosses and mentors. And again, like I've had the ability to see women in leadership, and even now I'm seeing women in leadership. So even how I look at myself or profile myself as a career person, I don't see myself being in lower levels of management because I've constantly been exposed to women who are doing like such amazing and great things. So I think like there are definitely like so many things I appreciate about the journey, but I think the humility also helps, and that's something that like I would want to encourage guys to do. I think like when you're starting your career, it may seem very difficult, and I can tell you like it's a test. It's a very big test because you'll be told to do things and you're just like ish.
As
As
in,
if
some of my friends tell me they're sent to buy the boss lunch and stuff, but I'm hoping that doesn't happen everywhere.
it happens in some organizations. I've also like I've dealt with people. I've even spoken to guys who like just the stories they tell me are just like horrible. Yeah, like yeah, the stories they tell me are just horrible. And it's like it's even stories that extend to the tune of sexual harassment and being told to peleka your CV and your cover letter to people's hotels. So the stories I've had out here are really not the best. But let me just say this: while maintaining your principles, remain humble. I would not encourage anyone to go for mandazi, but those things like binding, those things like drafting letters, you
Just
never
do
know.
that.
Yeah, just do them. You never know when they'll come in handy, because one day you'll have to oversee someone drafting a letter, and if you never drafted a letter at any point in your career, you might, you might not be aware of like how to navigate that. So yeah, humility I think is key. And I mean, come in should I say expecting very little and get the most out of the position.
Yeah, so expect little but hope for the be optimistic and still be ambitious because it's the
Exactly.
opportunities will come. It's just while the opportunity is waiting to come through, you should still survive through this temporary phase,
And
right?
like the worst thing is like especially if you don't have an alternative opportunity, I would encourage or anyone to take any opportunity, because the worst thing about the job market in Kenya is only until you have experience do you get opportunities. So like you can go there with your, even go with your PhD. And I actually have a very close friend who has a PhD. But even go with your PhD, if you do not have relevant experience that can back up your documents, you can have even 10 degrees and no one will care. So I think like my advice would be in the first 2 years, spend a lot of time like building your profile, get into organizations, knowing exactly what you want to get out of them. And like, I mean, just build your expertise in the area, because learned knowledge is very different from applied knowledge. So
Yeah.
you might never be able to present yourself in an interview if you don't take those L's in earlier. So just take the L's 1 or 2 years. I can honestly assure you things do get better.
That's good. I have a question here from Brian. So he says that this is an interesting discussion, and he's asking you from your perspective. I guess from what you're discussing earlier, even your dad asking you when will the cost of your degree pay off. Now that you have, you're on the other side, do you think studying abroad is worth it? You know how costly it is. Do you think it's worth it?
I do think it's worth it. Yeah, I mean, granted it's costly. But I do think that you have the potential to potentially climb through the ranks a lot faster if you put yourself in the right way. And it's not just about studying abroad. And that's something that like I am very keen on telling guys. It's not just about where you got your degree. It's about like once the door is opened, are you able to keep it open? Because a lot of guys come in with their attitudes and their etcs, and like you don't match your degree in a sense, like once you get into the door. So I mean, like every door that's opened, make sure you take advantage of it to the fullest. And then like, I mean, just the humility, but I definitely do think it's worth it. I think in later years it does set you apart.
Yeah.
I think especially like if you're in the research space, for instance. I once applied, in fact, my former employer, Kipra. Kipra, basically, the entry level position is like a master's degree holder. So it does then start setting you apart at later stages of your career. So I don't think you should feel like it's a lost cause. And I genuinely do believe that at some point it will now fully pay off. For me, it's starting to now fully pay off.
Yeah, and I mean, having studied abroad myself as well, I can definitely tell you, I think it opens up your mind to different ways of thinking, different cultures, and there's just something that does to you. You're more adaptable. Not everything excites you. Like now you've experienced it, you know how it is. You go through that culture shock phase way beforehand, so you can literally be placed anywhere in the
Yeah.
world and be fine. You know that initial phase where you're trying to survive in a whole new country away from your family. So now we're already used to that. We know how to establish ourselves in different countries. So I feel it makes you a lot adaptable as well.
And like, I
Uh,
mean,
uh-huh.
even about like flexibility. And maybe part of the reason I was so open to doing even the most tiny of jobs, like me, by the way, I had no issue binding or whatever. But it's because at some point in my life I was a bartender. Sonny, you know this. Like
You
you
know the jobs we did.
the jobs we do. So you can't come back here and say you're above anything when you are somewhere more close. So I mean
Selling hot dogs at Old Trafford. Both of us did
that
that.
so yeah,
Yeah.
that flexibility, that adaptability does come. And you're right about the exposure, because with that exposure you're then able to like handle very diverse people, and
Yeah.
sort of like you're able to like sort of fit into any situation or any context. So I think
Wow.
there are a lot of benefits beyond just do you get the money. Like I mean, so many soft skills that even just that experience exposes you to.
I agree. So it's kind of like we already transitioned into the Q&A space, which is good because, the questions are coming through as we're going along. And I cannot imagine I forgot about this feature, but we'll use it for our last question. I could actually show the comment on the screen, but, we're doing this towards the end. But you can see that John is asking,
Yeah.
did you perhaps consider working abroad, be it in other countries, or what sold it for you to move back to Kenya? Would you consider studying abroad again, perhaps a PhD?
Um, yeah, I mean, like, I would definitely study abroad again. In fact, like, those who know the space, I mean, I'm in the research space, so basically, like your certifications or your documents do determine like
Very
how
much.
how far up the ladder that you'll go. So would I consider studying abroad again? Yes. I may not necessarily do a full-time PhD course in like the UK or whatever, because it's never been my dream to live outside of Kenya. And so I think that is maintained. I can do it for shorter periods, like I mean 5 months, like I could travel to some other place, work for an amount of time, and then come back. But I've always been passionate about the Kenyan development space. And I mean, Sonny knows about like one of the things I've bathed in recent times around policy, because I'm very passionate about like people being involved in public policy and advocating for change. And really, when you're out of your country, you become almost detached to the policy process. So for me, I'm very passionate about staying in Kenya. So PhD abroad, yes, but I would most likely do it remotely. Do like an thing.
Yeah.
Yes. And did I consider working abroad? I didn't even apply. So
I
knows.
remember. But you had also personal circumstances that were,
Yeah,
accelerating that need to go back much
yeah,
quicker than, because if you mentioned earlier in this live that if that wasn't really happening, you might have done maybe 1 or 2 years before going
yeah.
back, but you'd have still gone back anyway.
Yeah, I think the goal was always to come back. But yes, I would have definitely done maybe a year. I honestly think it's might have been easier, but yes, I would have probably done a year before coming back.
Perfect. So I think we can now start winding down. But you did mention it just a few minutes ago about something that you birthed recently, and it of course wasn't a child. You birthed, but you have your own project that you're currently doing. Could you talk people through what it is that you're currently doing together with, your colleagues who you used to work with at Kipra?
Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned, by the way, first of all, I'd like to clarify, not all government institutions are bad or not doing well. I think KIPA is one of those organizations that really invests in youth development and instilling passion around public policy. And so this child of mine that I birthed is called 254 Youth Policy.
Mm-hmm.
For Youth Policy Cafe. And what we do is based off of our experience and our networks. We try our best to link policymakers and policy implementers with youth who we believe are the drivers of change. So we do that a number of ways, like we've capacity built a number of youth groups on policy issues. We've invited various policymakers to speak in certain forums that we hold. Again, we try our best to maintain our links and our networks with those policymakers so that we can keep interacting with them on various policy documents and policy issues. But we also break down what would seem to be complex policy documents into like very relatable sort of conversations with young people. So for me, building that bridge or that gap is extremely important. Yeah, so like I mean, anyone who is interested in policy, which you all should be, because it bites us all in the ass. Oh, sorry.
The problem of life is we cannot cut out those words, Samantha.
Bites us all. So it's very
Mhm.
important that we get involved in that conversation.
Now, I agree. If, most of us youth, we tend to think that, everything to do with policies, the politicians' case and the older generations, problem, but it comes to, affect us in our day to day. So I'm really happy you set up that channel because you break it down for us in a language we all understand and not full of propaganda. So keep up with what you're doing. Make sure you follow her channel. It's called 254 Youth Policy Cafe. They also hold webinars. So every now and then, so follow Samantha on LinkedIn just to get to hear about the events when they have them. We have one last question here before we go, before we dial off. It's from Broski. He's asking, how does local accommodation compare to abroad in terms of prices? Did you need to settle in your parents' place for a while?
Of course. In fact, I'm still squatting over here. um, how do local okay, the thing with prices, I think accommodation in the UK is a lot more expensive. But I do think as well, people in the UK are paid a lot more. Even when you are in uni, like abroad, you get a lot more in terms of allowances. You get even like those bartender jobs that we're talking about, you could make 500-600 pounds easy in a month, like if you had like a very fast month. So the money is a lot more in the UK. So I think that's where the disconnect comes, because like you then move into Kenya, and unfortunately you have certain standards.
Yeah.
uh, and yes, so your salary in the initial years will definitely not match those standards. So yeah, that I think is a gap. But in terms of even the size of the accommodation, I think houses in Kenya are slightly bigger. You might get a house for 80K in the UK, and a house for 80K in Kenya would be very different. It's just
Yeah.
like if you earn enough to pay that 80,000 in rent.
So it's not necessarily the prices, it's more the pay that you're getting from your employer that actually stops you from really, living the lifestyle that you're used to. But in
Mm,
terms of the prices themselves, they're quite affordable,
yeah.
relatively compared to the UK, basically.
Yeah, I think they're affordable, but especially like if you're looking to get a mortgage or looking to own a home, that's a whole complete, like it's a completely different conversation, because um while accommodate, like while the price tag on the house may look kidogo, the mortgage rates in Kenya are unrealistic.
Mm,
The 14%. So you end up with a thing that holds you hostage for 25 years. You end up paying probably 3 times the cost of that house.
mm.
So there are various other dynamics, because I know the mortgage rates in the UK, for instance, are a lot lower than that. So there's things like that that now affect your ability to get security in that sense.
I agree. I think also personally, if I did move back to Kenya, I'd probably move back home for a bit. I think, when you're abroad, you don't really have a choice. Who are you moving back home
Yeah,
to?
that's
So,
back to.
it,
But
yeah.
a question on whether you'd move back during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like my personal opinion on that COVID question is, would I move back now? I don't think so. If I got an opportunity outside the country, I don't
Mm,
know. But again, I don't know what the market looks externally, because I know right now a lot of private companies have more or less shut down or are significantly downscaling,
yeah.
and it cuts across sectors. I also know like Gava is not employing, because I'm sure anyone who's aware of the debt situation knows that we are also trying to like cut down on that wage bill to the extent possible. So you might come back and you might not necessarily get employment. I mean, like it might even be difficult to get an internship. So I think at this particular point, I may not be, just because
You
of the
didn't advise. Yeah.
situation, I would not necessarily move back at this point.
In the UK, it really depends on what sector you're in. So, of course, people are being made redundant. It started since last year. Even in the UK, we've been in lockdown since December. So it's not like the economy is flourishing, but certain sectors are flourishing. So I think it goes down to something that you highlighted earlier. It's more about humility and taking any opportunity available where you have no alternatives. So I definitely know in like my area, it's flourishing. Funny enough, but certain areas they're not, and you just have to be realistic. You don't stick to this is the degree that I did, so I have to do this. It's more about being realistic about what's available, and then basically working with that. Um, we have one more question
Mhm.
from Brian. He's asking for people considering to study abroad, what tips would you give? I think this one both of us can respond to it, but start off,
Yeah.
Sami. Mm-hmm.
So the tips I would give is, firstly, you have to be extremely aware of what you're going to do, and whether it makes sense to do it abroad. I know people who have gone to like do certain degrees in the UK, for instance, and have come back to Kenya and had to undergo like 1,000,001 certifications. It will still set you, but you just need to establish whether you're better off doing the undergrad here and mastering abroad, or like basically you'd have to like strike that balance. So I think you need to be aware about like what career you're trying to pursue. um, and I also genuinely think you need to understand where you're going to, like, because again, not all universities are specialized in all areas. You'll find, like, say, a University of Manchester has particular expertise.
I think we've lost you, Samantha. It was holding up very well for majority of the live. So as we wait for her to come back, I'll also start answering the question. So some of the tips from my end, just really be prepared for the culture shock. The more prepared you are and more open-minded you are, the better it will be for you. It will not be the same. It's a completely different feeling being in a whole other country away from your family for the first time. Every single thing will be, a whole new experience, but depending on what mindset you have at the time, it will really determine how you see the experience. Also, as she mentioned, consider what career you want to go into, because depending on the country that you're going to work in after, it could be like, I'll give an example of my degree that I did. So I did electronic engineering. And electronic engineering in Kenya, we barely manufacture any electronics in Kenya. So if I was moving back to Kenya, I can't really stick to, I studied electronic engineering and this is what I need to work in. That wouldn't be realistic and it wouldn't be practical. So if I'm doing that degree, then I need to be realistic and know that maybe I should apply in opportunities in the technology sector. So I don't have to be so adamant that I have to do, I have to be in an industry where I'm manufacturing electronics and I'm working towards that, or in an automotive industry where they're manufacturing cars and they're trying to automate and put some automation towards the manufacturing of that. So basically, don't be too fixed on it. Do the degree knowing where you're headed to. So depending on what career you'd like to do, depending on where you want to work, have that in mind and just be open-minded. Studying abroad is not the worst thing in the world. In fact, it's a very good opportunity to meet other cultures, to, see how the world is out there and bring that back to your country or even get the job over there. But it was very nice having Samantha with me. In fact, I think she's joined back. Hey,
Okay,
Samantha.
so sorry.
I was just walking them through some of the tips that, from my own experience also studying abroad. So I'd highlighted things like just being open-minded because, working away from family, that's a whole new experience. The people, the language, the food, everything is different. Also knowing where it is you want to end up and being flexible about it, because like my degree, electronic engineering, if I come back to Kenya and expect to work in that area, it's not going to be possible. We don't manufacture any electronics, but maybe it will be applicable to go work in Safaricom, technology sector, communications area. So you just need to be flexible and know what to expect. Did you want to
Yeah.
add on anything to that? Because I know you dropped out in the middle of your statement.
No, yeah, I think like you're actually like better placed to even speak to this because like I know you've done a lot of research into it and stuff like that. But yeah, I think those were just like my main go-tos. And again, like I think even as you pursue the career, I think like even as you go in, you need to know whether you're coming back or staying there. Like and it's just like it's cross-cutting, like it cuts across careers, but especially to like legal degrees and medical degrees, you really need to be clear about like whether you're coming back, because if you're coming back, then the practicality of doing them abroad then becomes a bit sketchy.
Yeah, I agree. So thanks everyone for sharing your questions. Thank you, Samantha, so much for joining in, bearing through the technical difficulties. For all the people who've been with us since 6:30 when we're trying to figure this out, thank you so much. I can see Dennis here is saying good insights from both of us. Thank you, Dennis. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And Samantha, maybe we can do this another time. Hopefully next time we'll be able to walk through our agenda because everything actually
Yeah.
falls in place.
Yeah.
But yeah, any parting shot for our viewers before we go?
Yeah, so basically I'd just like to share just a few hacks that I think have worked for me, but also that I think if I did sooner, I would have probably been a lot further than I am currently. I think one thing that I've noticed is that LinkedIn has become a very useful tool, especially like in the Kenyan context. I think people are no longer believing CVs and believing cover letters. So yeah, so I would have started building my LinkedIn profile even at university level and updating whatever I do and like basically building that brand. A second thing I would do, and something that has worked for me, is that whenever like you work in a particular place, regardless of the position, make sure you make friends with your workmates, make sure you make friends with your bosses. They become your greatest brand ambassadors. A lot of guys in higher places know a lot of people, and they might be what makes the difference between whether you get another job or whether you remain at intern level or you progress to the next point. So I think make sure you network with your with your fellow employees and with your bosses. I think that's very critical. And I think also like start positioning yourself at a very early stage. I think, as I mentioned, I knew by the time I was coming back to Kenya that I didn't want to be an actuary. So by the time I was taking up my first job, I knew the direction that I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to be in government or a place where they do work in that social impact space. And I sort of navigated, I sort of just moved through that channel. But like, I mean, begin positioning yourself at a very early age. Don't be that guy who just does everything as well. While you should be open to opportunities, be open to relevant opportunities. Don't just do an internship course. Yeah, so
I
I think those are like three things. And maybe a fourth is, I think, practice for interviews. Like, I think something that I've noticed is sometimes i- guys are so confident in their skills that they come for interviews unprepared. And something as small as not knowing what an organization does can either make or break, yeah, your, like basically make or break your progress. So I think
yeah.
that's my parting shot. But I think all said and done, I think it's very achievable. Guys have come to Kenya, guys have thrived. It may seem very difficult in initial stages, but I honestly think that you should not lose hope throughout that journey. Stay positive, and your positivity is what will move you from one place to another.
Really well said, find opportunities, but be open to relevant opportunities, not just everything. That's a good way to end the live. Thank you so much. Also, I can see here, some positive feedback that we're receiving. And maybe we can do this another time if you
Yeah.
all enjoyed it. If this is something we can do again, I'm very open to actually having another conversation, maybe even about tips on how to prepare for interviews, or you can even focus more on how to study abroad. We can see what topics. So put your suggestions in the comments box, and we'll cover it in the next live. Thank you. Till next time. Bye.
Thank you, Sonny. Bye.